So welcome. So today we're going to be talking about step 10, and hopefully next week, if we get through step 10, we're going to go on to step 11, and then if you want to do more workshops after that, we can do more workshops. What I'm going to do, it'll be really boring if it's just me speaking. So what I'm going to do is say a few things and then ask people if they have any questions, ask people if they have any comments, ask people if they want to share briefly on what we've discussed so that we can all take part. And I'll give you the instructions for how to contribute when we get to that point. So where we're going to start is page 84 of the big book. And we're going to start with the middle phrase, middle paragraph rather. This thought brings us to step 10. And we've got to ask ourselves, well, what is the thought that brings us to step 10? And it's actually the previous. Let's look at the previous paragraph. Oh, let me just turn... Ugh. There we go. Let's just turn that off. The previous paragraph concerns the step 9 promises. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They're being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. There's a little insight that I'd like to share with you briefly on that. To materialize is to appear in the material realm. Now, that implies that those things are there already, and all that is happening is that they are coming down to us. So whatever good things we've done in the steps up to that point are, as it were, stored up in heaven and come down to us on earth and materialize in our lives. But every action we take in recovery is going to create something in heaven which then materializes in our actual lives. This thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. And here's the important line that I wanted to talk about first, which is we have entered the world of the Spirit. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I certainly have. There are a lot of alcoholics in my life. There are a lot of addicts in my life. There are a lot of people in trouble in my life. There have been for decades. I grew up in a house full of people who were in trouble. There were only 2 other people in the house, but it felt like it was a house full of people in trouble. And people in trouble tend to attract my attention, and I can't be comfortable until they are fixed. I want to talk a little bit about step 1, about what my problem is that the program is there to solve in my relationships with other people. And it's really a boundary problem. There's one of the words for sin is transgression. And that means to cross a boundary. I think the Hebrew is avera. I may be wrong on that. Is that right, Elisha? Yes, okay, that's right. So you're crossing something you should not be crossing. And my boundaries got all crossed. So first of all, and these are the 4 ways in which I go crazy, and which is where my step 1 in Al-Anon lives, is that first of all, I take responsibility for you. Why? Because if I don't, it's going to be a mess. I'm guessing most of you run households, and you've got lots of children, and maybe the husband is one of the children. if you're not the efficient one, nothing is going to get done. And this is the house that I grew up in. My mother was the Al-Anon. And, she was some other things too, but the poor dear was an Al-Anon. If she didn't do it, it wouldn't get done right. She would take responsibility for me. She would take responsibility for my father, who may or may not have been an addict. We're not entirely sure. And she took responsibility for him, so she was exhausted. And she was trapped in the material plane because there were always 143 things to do, and time to do only 14 of them. So something always has to be sacrificed. Hundreds of things have to be sacrificed the whole time when you're taking responsibility for everyone. Now, when I'm taking responsibility for other people, I'm not taking responsibility for me. So I look a wreck, I feel a wreck. I'm not allowed to nap because even fewer things will get... If I nap, even fewer things will get done. I won't be able to nap because I'll be so worried about all the things that need to get done. I won't be able to nap properly. So I'm just going to muscle through, and then I pass out at 10 o'clock at night. I don't go to sleep, I pass out. What happens next? I take responsibility for other people. I don't take responsibility for me. I deny other people's responsibility for them. So I infantilize other people. I treat them like children. And I exonerate things I should not exonerate. I put up with things I shouldn't put up with. So my experience with lots of people in Alcoholics Anonymous is that I've put up with aggressive and rude and impossible behaviour far longer than I should have, because I wasn't letting the other person have the responsibility for the consequences of their actions. It was me that was responsible for making up for their problems. And then the final craziness, I made other people responsible for me. And this would come in two forms. Rescue me and look after me. That's one of them. The second one is, if I feel bad, it's your fault. And that's where all the punishment comes in. Now, there's a lot of craziness in that. I'm responsible for you, I'm not responsible for me. You're not responsible for you, but you are responsible for me. Avera in all directions. And so this is not about moral badness. This is not chet, this is avera. You could be perfectly moral, but just really confused about where you stop and the next person ends. So although, certainly there is immoral behaviour when I'm angry, when I'm vindictive, when I'm punishing, that's immoral. But most of it, honestly, is just confusion. So the purpose of the programme is to deconfuse me, so that I can be released from the obligation to fix everyone else. I can leave other people to have the consequences of their actions. I stop blaming other people. I start to look after myself. I start to take naps. There are days, when I have a good day, it's a day when I can take 3 naps. 3. That's 3 naps and not feel guilty about it. Why do I take those naps? Because I need those naps. Give me 1 minute. Some people are going crazy on Skype. I just need to tell them how to join us. There we go. So when it says we've entered the world of the Spirit, it means I'm released I'm released from the material world. Whenever I have a resentment, I'm tied to the material world because I'm tied to whatever you have done wrong in the material world. So the first thing that severs me from the material world is when I forgive and I let your actions recede into the mist. They've just gone. The second thing, and that happens in step 4. The second thing that I do is I convey all of the secrets. And this is enormously important. This happens in step 5. And then I'm released from my own past. The other part is in steps 8 and 9, where I'm released from the actions I've taken by making amends. And then I've entered the world of the Spirit. Now, what that means to me, this world of the Spirit, is that I'm safe in the hand of God, in the palm of God's hands. And my physical body remains in the material world, but it's not who I am. It's not my purpose. I've got things to do here, which God has given me to do, but I live elsewhere. And the image that I find really, really helpful is the first line of Psalm 91. Or the first few lines of Psalm 91, where you have this image of God as a bird in a very high place, with the wings covering the person, so that they're completely safe. And then there's the list of all of the things that you are protected from. To me, that is the world of the Spirit. That's where I really am. And yeah, sure, during the day, I spend a lot of time in the material world. But what happens here, just doesn't matter so much. And if you've been in recovery for a while, you've probably realised over the last week that a whole lot more people are realising they cannot rely on the material realm than realised it even 3 weeks ago. I think in recovery, we're used to trying to spend as much time as possible in the realm of the Spirit and detaching from the material world. So we should be really good at this by now. The point about step 10, it says, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. Now, there are 3 levels at which we continue to take personal inventory. The first one is in real time as we pass through the day, and we're going to talk a lot about that. The second one is when we get to the end of the day and we do a little review, or maybe everything collapses in the middle of the day and we do a little review. The instructions for that are on page 86. But that's under the heading of step 11. And then the book, The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, talks about a semi-annual house cleaning. So in the big book, they'd been sober for 4 years. They had the tool of step 10 on pages 84 and 85. They had the tool of the nightly review in step 11. And they also had the tool of, but they didn't yet have the tool of doing the annual or semi-annual house cleaning. There was the step 4, but people didn't do that more than once. By the time they got to 1955, they realised we need a little more sometimes than just the daily stuff. So we're going to revisit some bigger inventory. But step 10 in the big book is about only one aspect of that, which is the setting right any new mistakes as we go along. Now, before we go on, I'd like to ask, are there any questions or does anyone have any comments? I'm going to take the mute off everyone. You then, if you would like to unmute yourselves and say something, just come in and say something or ask a question. We'll do a more complex procedure with raising hands if necessary, but I don't want to be overly complicated. So I've unmuted everyone. Would anyone like to say anything or ask a question?
Hey, Mazal, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So something that came up for me also when you were talking, and also in multiple step workshops and working the steps, when people talk about spirituality and about detaching from the material world, how, to me, it sounds like a coping mechanism for trauma. And so how do I'm just curious as to where is the line of ignoring issues versus detaching from reality and ignoring trauma and using it as a coping mechanism versus, okay, well, that doesn't really matter because who cares if it's a coping mechanism? It gives you peace. I'm just kind of confused. Like I have this inability to accept it because my brain tells me, okay, that's a coping mechanism, so it's not real. Like detaching from reality is shtuyot. Right.
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
It does. I'm just going to mute everyone again. If at any point you're unmuted but not saying anything, we can still hear your background noise. So please keep yourself to mute unless you're speaking. I'm just going to mute everyone now. So that was a really good question. I'm going to repeat it in case people didn't catch it, and I'm going to repeat what I heard, which may be different than what the question actually was. So there is such a thing as trauma. And are we just escaping reality as a coping mechanism? The first point, my experience of trauma reactions is that sometimes a reasonably small event will happen today, which reminds me psychologically of a really bad event that happened a long time ago. And all of the emotions from the event from a long time ago hit me now as though they are a response to today, but they're not. They're a response to 10 years ago, to 20 years ago, to 30 years ago, to 40 years ago. And, panic attacks, sweating, meltdowns, freakouts, and I've done all of those because of unresolved trauma. Now, we've got to have a distinction here between dealing with things in the moment and dealing with things in the bigger picture. The bigger picture is steps 1 through 9. And that's where, in my case, the bulk of that trauma stuff got dealt with. A lot of the rest of the trauma stuff got dealt with in step 12. When I'm helping other people through the first 9 steps, particularly with childhood trauma stuff, another part of me gets healed every single time I show someone else the way out. The reality that if I want a reality to be real for me, I have to be teaching it, I have to be showing it, I have to be sharing it with endless other people. That's what maintains that truth and reality for me. The more important question here is, actually no, there are 2 more questions here. The first one is about how do you deal with it in the moment? Let's say you're in the middle of the first 9 steps. You're not going to get over the trauma between now and Thursday. It's a long process for the brain to be literally rewired. So the coping mechanisms in the moment are super useful. And there is a strange paradox here that to access the realm of the spirit, sometimes I need to do things physically, which means I need to concentrate on my breathing. I need to ask myself, what is literally happening right now? Is anything bad happening right now? What can I hear? What can I touch? What can I smell? Lie on a bed with your hands on the blanket and feel how the blanket feels. Yoga. The irony is you get back into your body and you are released from the material world. Because the material world, when we say the material world, we're not really talking about the material world. Because the physical world is fine. When we're talking about detaching from the material world, we're talking about detaching from the pictures of hell we've produced in our own minds about the material world. I've dealt with a lot of tragedies in my life, most of which never happened. Even over the last week. So detachment from the material world is not detachment from the actual material world. Detachment from the material world is detachment from the story I've told myself about the material world. This is why, when you're saying the first line of Psalm 91, and you are going up to the top of that mountain with the wings of the bird sheltering you, you're not escaping from reality to a fantasy land. You're going from the fantasy of all of the resentments and fears and reactions to genuine reality. That is the real reality, which is concealed by the so-called material world. Are there any more questions or comments? I'm going to unmute. Just come in with your question or comment. Okay, so I'm going to come in with the next point. Actually, I just need to run a quick test. Elisheva, can I ask you to do a test? Okay, what I'm going to do is mute everyone. Right, can you unmute yourself? Great. Okay, that's perfect. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to mute everyone and I won't unmute the group. When I ask you to contribute, just unmute yourself if you would like to say something, but I'm going to mute everyone again right now. Good, there we go. So we have entered the world of the spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. Okay, there's a lot in this line. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. You see, my idea is that my next function is to clean the house and do the work and earn the money and fix them, stop them, whoever they are, complaining, acting out. If only they worked their program, they wouldn't be bothering me. That's not my function. Now, okay, I may have roles to play. Yes, I may need to clean the house, do the work, milk the cow, whatever your job is. But what we've got is surface function and real function. And my real function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. Not for me, not for anyone else, but for the higher power. Also, it never says anywhere in the book that this function is ever completed. So this function goes on forever. Step 10 goes on forever. And if I can grow in understanding and effectiveness, I have to admit I am not at the moment at peak understanding and effectiveness. One of my Al-Anon problems is the presumption that I am totally at peak understanding. Like whatever situation you present to me, I've got it, I understand, I know what's going on here, therefore I know the answer, I know the solution. I have a horrible habit when people present situations to me. The less I know about you, the clearer I am about what you need to do to be okay. The solution lies in this line. I need to grow in understanding and effectiveness, which means recognizing I'm not making my judgments, my assessments based on full information. I always need to be asking more questions when I'm tempted to give a view, to give my assessment of something, what someone should do. I need to ask a lot of questions. I need to find out more. And I can't tell you how often I've been really upset by someone's behaviour. But I just ask and ask and ask, and when I finally find out what situation they're in, I'm suddenly, now I understand, and I can forgive. But I need to ask first, and then quietly find out what is going on. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Someone said to me many years ago, this is not an overnight matter, it's a during the day matter. So sometimes people say, they love recovery, they go to meetings, they go to conventions, they sponsor people, but it's over there. I have my life here on one side, and I have my recovery over there. And more recovery, less life. More life, less recovery. Because in the material world, there appear to be these limitations. So if you have more of one, of course you have less of the other. The important thing to realize is that my step 10 is a method by which I live my life. It's not something separate. It's not separate in space. It's not separate in time. It's my actual method for living. And there's a lot of detail here, but I'm going to give you a short overview now, which is, in my mind, now I don't want to alarm anyone, but I have more than one voice in my mind. Just, if you have more than one voice in your mind, just wave at me. There are different voices at different times. Some people talk about a split personality. If I could keep it to 2, I'd be doing really well. But sometimes there are many different voices clamoring for attention. And the fearful voice, which is also the angry voice, which is also the guilty voice, which is also the ashamed voice, which is also the voice which finds fault in me and finds fault in you and finds fault in the government and the world and the design of the universe. That voice sounds very much like my own. I listen to it and I think I'm thinking, and I'm not thinking. What is going on is that voice is speaking, it sounds like me, so I think it's me. Right. Now, below that voice, which is the voice, let's call it the voice of the ego, below that voice is another much quieter voice. The one that gives me good advice, like, maybe you want to call your sponsor. How about you have a nap? Do you want to eat something? You haven't eaten anything since breakfast. How about you give your mother a call? How about you give your mother a break? Just whatever the advice. There's good advice, there's quiet advice way below the surface of all of the loud voices. So my job in step 10 is to remember that as I'm driving the car along the road, the car of my life, I'm going to get direction from all sorts of different voices. My identity is not any of those voices. I'm the one that gets to pick and choose which of those voices am I going to listen to. And so my ideal state in step 10 as I proceed through the day is that I'm sitting back and quietly pausing and working out which is the voice to listen to. One of the people that has taught me best about how to do this is my other half. I ask my other half a question. An answer may come straight away. Unusual. It's usually 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 2 weeks, 8 or 9 years. There was a question I asked 8 or 9 years ago. I got an answer yesterday. I didn't even have to ask the question again. The answer came. That's someone who knows to pause, to breathe, to stand back and to wait, and then to be poised and listen to the voice that should be listened to. The ego always answers first. The ego often answers before the question has been completed. A friend of mine, if you'll permit a baseball analogy, says that grace always bats last. So the grace of God coming into my life happens after I've churned myself up, and then finally the voice of God, the grace of God, which is a gift, that comes in last. So the practice of step 10, per the big book, is not endlessly writing inventory. Okay, there will be times in the rest of your life you're going to want to write inventory. Fine. Maybe you will write inventory on a daily basis. Drives me crazy, so I don't write. There's nothing in the book that tells me to write every day, so I don't write every day. I do inventory every day. So I look at myself and say what needs to be done differently every day. But I'm not constantly scratching at myself. What I want to do in step 10 is to develop this real-time consciousness of what is going on in my mind, and develop better decision-making about which voice to listen to, and to correct myself when I'm going wrong. Does anyone have any comments or would like to share something or have any questions? We're only 13, 14 people, so feel free to just come in and share or ask a question. You're all very quiet today. Okay, so I'm going to carry on.
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a friend here. I'm translating a question for her.
Yeah.
She wanted to know if we, in terms of writing inventory,
Yeah.
she says that if she doesn't write inventory, she can't get constructive feedback from people. And so she was wondering, like, on a technical basis, how do you do that?
Okay. Thank you for that. That's an excellent question. When we say we write inventory, that can mean lots of different things. One thing that I've observed in AA over the years is there are lots of different schools of thought within AA. It's rather like with the development of the Hasidic movement. You have the reaction to the Hasidic movement, and now there are lots of arguments, right? So this happens in AA. You've got the people who are so into the spiritual stuff, and then you have the legalistic literalists on the other side of the argument, and people don't get on. There are data to suggest that people don't always get on. Right. So one of the things I've observed in AA is that people who like exercises and writing stuff down and give me homework to do, these were the people that were good at school, that got good grades. Give me something to do and I'll do it. But what can happen is that the same inventory gets written day after day after day after day. And this will often happen, certainly true in my case. I grew up in an environment where I was criticised a fair amount, and I took that critical voice, internalised it, and then used the program to justify criticising myself again and again and again and again and again. And that's what I meant about scratching at myself. Nothing heals unless it is allowed to heal. So we don't heal ourselves, we place ourselves in a position where healing can take place. A doctor doesn't heal. He or she cleans the wound, stitches it up, aligns the skin, and then healing naturally takes place. If any of you have dogs or cats that have had operations, they have this cone like that to put on their head so they can't pick or scratch at the wounds. Now, that type of repetitive... there's a physical injury called repetitive strain injury, where typists used to get it on those very hard typewriters from before computers. And I can get repetitive inventory injury, where I'm just repeating the inventory and not making any progress, but just getting more and more desperate. Now, that doesn't work. What does work, when I'm confused in a situation, and often I will have new situations I've never faced before, then I write, but it's because I'm confused. If I can't tell the story about what is going on to someone else, you're absolutely right, I can't get constructive feedback. So what you may find in early recovery, you're going to need to write a lot. But the purpose of writing a lot, or writing often rather, the purpose of writing often is so that you get a handle, that you start to understand what is actually going on, in order that you can go and tell someone else and get constructive feedback. But it's the important thing is to recognise why you're doing it, and it's to get clarity, to have notes you can read out to someone else. The act of writing itself, the same thing again and again and again, has never helped me. In fact, it becomes a burden, and then I don't want to do it. Does that answer your question at all? Or Mazal's friend?
Yeah, that answers the question.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. Good. So, by the way, now we started late. I'm going to suggest that we carry on till around 11:15. Is that all right with everyone? Yeah, there's some waving and some thumbs, and if you have to go at 11, that's fine. I'm recording it and I'll upload it onto Google Drive and send Emma and Elisheva the link, and then they can send the link onwards. Right, so then we're not going to get through step 10 today, just to let you know. There's a lot of material left.
Tim?
Yes?
Sorry, it's Emma. Somebody can't ask a question, so they sent it to me by WhatsApp.
Yes,
Can I ask
absolutely.
a question for them?
Yes.
Okay, here's a question. I think I'm taking inventory. It is challenging not to beat myself I'm not reading right. Not to beat myself up. hard to be constructive. Self-compassion, question mark. Also, does he have any insights on how to know when we are listening to the voice of grace and not listening to the voice of others?
Can you repeat the last bit again?
Yeah, now I have to go back up. Hang on 1 second. Also, does he have any insight on how to know when we are listening to the voice of grace and not others?
Can I pause for one moment? I'm just going to shut the video off for a sec. There's something I want to just check. Right, so we've got a question on compassion for oneself, and we've got a question on how do you know, is it the voice of God, or is it the voice of your Auntie Susan, which you heard 40 years ago and you've internalised and it's become the angry voice? Okay, so the first part of that, how do you not beat yourself up? Right. Who I am is spirit. Thought, word, and deed are the things which clothe my spirit in the material world. So how I actually live my life is through, in a practical sense, is through thought and word and deed. Now, if you don't know that you're spirit, because you've forgotten, the angel tapped whatever part of your head and you've now forgotten where you've come from, you're going to be super identified with your thinking, your speech, and your behaviour. So I will have a nasty vindictive thought about someone or a situation, and then if I think that's me, I feel terrible about me. I shouldn't feel terrible about me. I should feel terrible about the thought, because it's the thought which is wrong, not me. Now, thinking and speech and behaviour, they've been taught to me. So what to think, how to react, how to respond, what to say, what to do. I am necessarily a product of the society that I grew up in, of the family that I grew up in. So ways of thinking, ways of speaking, and ways of behaving, they're not who I am. They are tools that I was given. And there is a notion in some religions of the final judgment. Now, the final judgment is not the moment I'm cast into the fires of hell. The final judgment is where God looks at those thoughts and says, those thoughts don't work. Speaking like that doesn't help. Acting like that doesn't help. Would you like a different way to think? It's something which is happening the whole time. That if I listen to the inner voice, it can help. That final judgment on those thoughts and that speech and those behaviour can take place. So it means that when I'm doing inventory, I'm not doing inventory on me, because my spirit and soul are pure. I'm doing inventory on my thinking, my speech, and my behaviour. if I recognise I am not those things, they are tools that I've been given, and that I'm not bad, I'm mistaken. It's very easy when you do inventory to think that you're a bad person. Whereas, actually, more frighteningly, is to say, I'm wrong. You mean my perception of the situation is not true? That I'm not the wisest person I know? That's correct. I've simply been making 100,000 mistakes. Now, sin, a sense that there is something wrong with you, calls down punishment. Error, mistake, calls for correction. When you're driving the car and you feel the plants on the side of the road, the grass on one side of the road, or you feel the rumble strips in the middle of the road on the other side, you just adjust the steering wheel. When you realise you're driving too close to cars, you adjust the steering wheel. You don't go, I'm a terrible person, look at me, I drove so close to the car. No, you just adjust the steering wheel. And that's what inventory should be like. Oh, look, I've done it again. I want to find things wrong, simply so that I can change them. And the process of change, unfortunately, is very slow. And actual change is usually preceded by me saying 1,000 times in a row, ugh, I did it again. Ugh, I did it again. Look, I did it again. Look, I did it again. That's fine. That's how... If you've been programmed to respond in a certain way, just because someone points out that that doesn't help, like if you shout at them, it doesn't remove their character defects. I mean, that was news 27 years ago when I joined the world of recovery. If you shout at someone, it does not remove their character defects. So, we have the lesson. Did I carry on shouting at people, being angry, all of those things? Absolutely. So, lack of power is my problem. This is the basic idea from page 45 of the big book. It's not lack of information only. Sometimes we lack information. But once we've got the information, lack of power is the problem. And you can't be powerless and guilty at the same time. When you're standing in a queue, when you're standing in line, sometimes someone behind you pushes you, either because they've tripped or by accident they push you, and you push someone else because you've been pushed. I don't feel guilty in that situation. I apologise, I feel bad for the person if I've upset them. But it's completely different than if I've done it on purpose because I'm angry. Someone pushed me and I fell and pushed someone else. That's a recognition of powerlessness. And part of my recognition of powerlessness in my bad behaviour with other people is to realise the reason I'm doing this, the reason I'm maybe controlling or vindictive or sarcastic or manipulative, is because I was taught how to do that and I'm just continuing to do it. So the detachment is to say, I'm doing it again, I'm not a bad person, but I do need to spot it. And the next line is the core of step 10. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. I'm going to read a little bit on, but then go back over it in detail. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. So there are two sets of instructions for step 10. There's this part of this paragraph on page 84, and then there's another paragraph on 85. The middle of 85 has got a set of instructions too. But this is the first set of actual instructions. Everything else before that is the commentary. What we've now got is the law. So continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. I think this list is to be understood not as it were, a finite list. These 4 items stand for all types of mental problem, mental aberration, mental diversion from the true course. Because they're very big words. Let's take it from the back. So fear covers all forms of nervousness, twitchiness, anxiety, misgiving, panic attacks, the whole thing. Resentment covers any disturbance at the way things are. When I got to the world of recovery in 1993, someone said, you're going to need to do a resentment inventory. And I said, oh, I don't have resentments. I'm just upset a lot. I'm just very unhappy. I'm just upset. Okay. But it turns out upset is a particular flavour of resentment. The nature of resentment is to look at something, either within me or outside of me, and to say, no, I don't like it. Now, it might come in the form of very masculine anger and aggression. It might come in the form of disappointment. I'm not angry with you, I'm just disappointed. It's the same thing. Something is not the way I think it should be. Where I, as the great God of my life, have decided how everything should be. I've compared reality to my plan, and reality is wrong. So don't be misled by the flavour. You're probably going to need to learn what your flavours of resentment are in order to spot them. I tend to, for me, it tends to be disappointment, gloom, dejection, a lack of energy, just looking at the world and saying, I don't want any of this. Now, it doesn't look like grinding resentment, but it is resentment. The natural state is joy. Anything which is alive is naturally joyful. You look at cats, you look at dogs, you look at babies, they are joyful by nature. Okay, they have their moments, but basically they're joyful by nature. So what I'm looking for here in step 10, as I proceed through the day, is where have I lapsed into fear, which is basically upset about the future? Where have I lapsed into resentment, which is upset about the past or the present? And where have I lapsed into selfishness? And this needs to be defined. My understanding of selfishness is where I'm putting my interests above those of other people in an illegitimate way. Now, there are times I put my interests above those of other people and say no, or not yet, or never, or please never call me again. But it's the right thing, lose my number, but it's the right thing to do. The relationship, people ask me to do things for them that they should be doing for themselves. Sometimes people who have been in recovery for many years, who I'm sponsoring, who've been shown everything to do with the program, will bring out a whole stream of what's just happened with no processing, no analysis, no inventory, no consideration. Like a dog that's brought something in from outside and they drop it on, or a cat that just drops it on the mat in front of you, says, right, you do something with this. And when I say no, you need to do some work on that before you bring it to me, I'm saying no. Is that selfish? It's not. I'm putting my interests first in a way, which is that I've got more important things to do than to work your program for you. You might perceive it to be in your interest that I sort your mess out for you. So, but the truth is, the right thing to do is the right thing for everyone. So selfishness, it's with alcoholics in AA, is very straightforward. It may be the case with your alcoholic or drug addict or sex addict parents or husbands or children or whatever. That the selfishness is pretty clear. With the Al-Anons and the S-Anons, and I count myself 50-50 AA and Al-Anon in terms of my psychology, I've got to be careful because I have a strong inclination to be a martyr and to always put other people first, to run myself ragged and then become bitter. And so often I do have to put myself first, which is why the question with selfishness, if you're an Al-Anon or an S-Anon, is slightly different. It's where am I putting my interests first, where I really ought to be putting other people's interests first. So this involves some judgment. The alcoholics, it's usually straightforward. If you think you're being selfish, you're probably being selfish. With the Al-Anons, I'm afraid it takes some judgment. And dishonesty. Again, we've got to be really careful with this one. There was part of Emma's question which I haven't answered. I'll answer that in a moment. Dishonesty. So, outright lies, distortion. I'm very good at distorting situations in my mind or in presentation to other people. I don't have... the volume button on my crises is broken. The only volume is maximum crisis. There's no gradual lead up. My starting point with fear is total panic. Again, I don't gradually work up to it. The starting point is total panic, and then I expand from there. So dishonesty, part of the dishonesty is exaggeration and distortion. So we've got lying, so outright lying under dishonesty. We've got exaggeration and distortion. What else do we have? Omission. So failing to say things that we ought to say. And the last one is... I suppose there are some more. Self-deception. They say when an Al-Anon lets go of something, it has claw marks on it. And there have been alcoholics in my life where I should have let go years before I let go. But I hang on thinking that if only I explain it one more time, if only I try a little harder, eventually they'll get well. Or they'll stop being rude, manipulative, unpleasant, vindictive, nasty, weird. So self-deception, and then scheming. And I think that's one of my worst forms of dishonesty. And I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, I was a member of a group which was largely incompetent. And there was a nasty situation about the treasurer of the group who'd run away with the money and drunk it. And there was going to be a group conscience meeting to discuss what to do. Do we go to the police? Do we call the army? What do we do? And the group conscience meeting would normally be run by the GSR of the group. The GSR of the group was in the role for about 8 minutes at the point that it became apparent that there was going to be a group conscience meeting. But no one said to the kid, you know you're going to be taking the group conscience meeting. You're going to be right. No one said it. And I anticipated this terrible furore of if he was in charge of it and didn't know what he was doing, it's going to make it 1,000 times worse. So I sat next to him at a meeting and said, hello, how are you? And, oh, are you looking, are you all prepared for the group conscience meeting next Saturday or Sunday, or whatever it was? Now, I wasn't inquiring as to whether or not he was prepared for the meeting out of politeness. I was making sure he knew he was as the GSR, he was going to be taking it, and I thought that what he was going to say was, oh, am I taking the meeting? Tell me, how do I do it? I was positioning myself to control what went on by asking this innocent little question. This is dishonesty. Whenever I have to stop myself and say, oh, I need to think very, very carefully about how I say this, there's almost always some dishonesty there. I have a scheme, and I want to make sure that my scheme comes off. So I'm going to need to position this very carefully. So there are lots of different forms of dishonesty. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. Notice that there's no analysis. There's no writing at this point. Some analysis and writing may come later. But honestly, if I'm frightened, I'm wrong. If I'm resentful, I'm wrong. If I'm dishonest, I'm wrong. If I'm selfish, I'm wrong. What's to analyse? This is the middle of the day. I need to pause and come back to what I'm supposed to be doing. We discuss them with someone immediately if I need to. If you stopped every time you had a fearful thought and discussed them with someone else, you drive yourself and them crazy. So, not quite. I discuss them with someone immediately if I'm deeply disturbed or I'm confused as to why I'm what to do, or as to why I'm disturbed. But the someone that I'm discussing this with immediately could be God. I don't necessarily need to bother someone else just yet. I always go to God first. Make amends quickly if we've harmed someone. Which means I want to apologise straight away. I want to set it right. straight away, then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help, which is the action of the moment. What am I supposed to be doing right now? Maybe what I'm supposed to be doing right now is working. Maybe it's housework. Maybe it's hanging out with someone. Maybe it's praying. Maybe it's meditating. Maybe it's napping. Maybe it's playing with the cat. Who knows what needs to be, what is God's will right now? It may be the cat. But to bring myself back to this eternal present, that the entirety of eternity is contained in the present. And an idea I heard a very long time ago, which is useful to me, which is that God recreates the entire universe in every moment, like a heartbeat. So with each heartbeat, it's created, and it's created, and it's created, and it's created. And I need to be present for that eternally repeating creation, moment by moment. So to come back to Mazal's question from earlier, the reality is the present. The irreality is the warped stories in my mind. I need to keep coming back to the reality, which is where God is recreating everything in the moment. The question, how do you know if it's God's voice? If you know anything about history, you'll know that a lot of people have done some terrible things, being absolutely certain that God is on their side because he hates all the same people that you do. There are some people will occasionally make mistakes about this, and just because we're in recovery and we're nice doesn't mean that we're not going to make mistakes about this. So the question here, how do I know it's God's will? First of all, God tends not to, in my experience, shout. God might be quite loud on occasion, but it's not shouty, it's firm, and there's a difference. If the thought is not kind, it's not from God. The voice is itself quiet, generally. If I look at what I'm being asked to do, it will be in accordance with the principles of the steps, the traditions and the concepts. It will be consistent with what sponsors have told me. What I often need to do, though, is, especially if it's a big decision, is to pause for a long time. Sometimes big decisions, I might need to pause for weeks over them. Consult a small number of people who have a sense of humour, who in their lives are getting good practical results, people who know me, people who are basically very sensible and calm and kind. So I can check things out with them. Sometimes I need professionals or experts. If I need to consult a professional or an expert, I consult a professional or an expert. There are lots of ways of testing what comes down the tubes to me from the higher power. And with time you do get better at it. In general, and this I'm going to say this with some caution. In general, if it's God's will, I will know because I have no conflict about it. Very often when I finally realise the right thing to say, I'm at complete peace. If I'm at complete peace, the answer is more likely to be God's will, although I have made mistakes. If I can put off the decision until I'm at complete peace, all the better. But, and this is the difficult thing, sometimes God's will is the opposite of what I'm programmed to do. One of the things I've had to learn to do in recovery is ignore incoming phone calls, letters, emails, text messages, Skype calls, WhatsApp calls, the Facebook, the list goes on. I was brought up to reply to everything and to be polite. I was taught in AA, in principle, a very good thing. You don't leave people to it. You show them the courtesy of replying and responding and blah, blah, blah. However, what I've learned from Al-Anon is sometimes if I carry on responding, I'm still dancing with the crazy person and it's not helping anyone. And crazy people or upset people or people who are very damaged are very skilled at getting people like me to engage. And the conversation goes back and forth and is complicated and slippery. Every time you think you've achieved something, you've reached a point where you've got something agreed and something is understood, they throw something else into the mix and you're back at square one. You realise that nothing has been heard. So there are lots of times where the right thing to do is just stop. My favourite Al-Anon acronyms I got from Anne Lamott, and she said, wait, why am I talking? And waste, why am I still talking? So sometimes the right thing to do is just stop and walk away, and it feels like I'm abandoning them, that I'm not being kind, that I'm leaving them to their fate. I'm doing all sorts of terrible things, but it's the right thing. And so often I need people in recovery to reassure me that I am actually doing the right thing, even though it feels very wrong. So you can't tell by feeling alone. There are lots of different factors involved. Does anyone... I'm not going to go any further in the book. That we're going to start next time with love and tolerance of others is our code. Does anyone have any... We've got some time for some questions or comments. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Yes, just unmute yourself, Sarah Rivka. There we go.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Hi, Tim. Thank you so much. My question is this. The line, then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. So you're taking a very broad view of that, saying, maybe it's feeding my cat, maybe it's something that... I was taught a more literal interpretation of that means I then call somebody in the program, anybody, and ask them how they are and see if I can, be helpful to them in their program, like right at that moment. But I was just wondering what you think about that.
That's a great question. That's a great question. Right. It depends on the severity of the disturbance. So during the course of the day, if you drive 1,000 miles, you're going to adjust the steering wheel a lot. During the course of the day, I need to adjust the steering wheel a lot. So very often, let's say I'm at work and I keep worrying about something. It's like when you take a dog for a walk and the dog keeps wanting to sniff all the things it wants to sniff, and you've got the dog on the leash, and you have to gently and persistently pull the dog away from what it's sniffing back to the walk that you're on. And I need to do that with my own mind. I need to come back to the thing that I'm doing. And if I'm working, I try and do in my job 7 chargeable hours. I charge my clients based on effectively the chargeable hours. I try and do 7 chargeable hours a day. If I stopped and made a phone call to someone in AA every time I had a disturbing thought, I would not be serving my clients. So the person that I'm serving may be the client who's asked me to do some work and deliver it tomorrow. Cats are people too. If the cat wants some attention, shouldn't she get some attention? Sometimes the best thing I can do for other people is chill out, because I'm a danger to myself and others. So they say in aeroplanes, put your own oxygen mask on first before attempting to help someone else. So to be of use to someone else, what I can do sometimes is turn the phone off, turn the computer off, go and lie down, put some meditation music on, and get in a fit state in order to be able to go and help other people. With the actively reaching out to help people, it depends where you are in your recovery. If you've been sober or in recovery for a very long time, the chances are your phone rings a lot anyway. So you just rely on the incoming stream of, between 5 and 15 incoming communications a day to provide you with the opportunity to get out of yourself. If you're newer, you're going to have fewer incoming calls, so you're going to need to make lots more outgoing calls, maybe to newer people, maybe to peers, maybe to people outside recovery who are lonely. You may need to get volunteering things. So I think it depends where you are in your recovery, exactly how you implement that tool. The Al-Anon program, or the Anon programs, in my experience, require a lot more subtlety of interpretation and application than the AA program. The AA program is like entry level, and the Al-Anon program builds on that with a lot more sophistication. Because if you look at your basic alcoholic problem is excessive alcohol consumption, irresponsibility, and meanness. I mean, it's not complicated. Whereas with the Al-Anon problem that we talked about to start with, in my case, not looking after myself, taking responsibility for other people, exonerating them, infantilizing them, getting other people to rescue me, and then blaming them for how I feel. Those are 6 very different problems. So it isn't going to be the same thing which fixes each of those things. Sometimes it's opposite things. So opposite tools are needed at different times, which is why it takes a long time to get the hang of this stuff. The AA stuff I got the hang of very quickly. The Al-Anon stuff, I mean, in the last, between you and me and anyone listening to this, I've had some experiences over the last 6 months where I had the information 15 years ago to act right, but I did not see it. I got myself so entangled, and it took strong men to physically pull me out of the situation, say you're allowed to just stop. Good. Any more questions or comments? Just feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead. Good, so I've got one notice. Oh, Meredith.
I just wanted to say thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So I've got one notice for next week. I'm going to find out if I am required at 10 o'clock UK time next Sunday. I might try and get out of this other thing, because I'd rather this were the same time every week. It's just easier for people to have a fixed time. The details of this workshop, I suppose we can call it, are on that Evernote note that Elisheva and Emma kindly sent round, and I sent to a couple of other people individually as well. That note is updated in real time, so whenever I update it on my computer, it updates in the cloud, and when you click on the link, you see the updated version. So changes, additions, times, this has worked very well today. So we're going to, I think I'm going to keep using this. It's much better than Skype. So we're going to carry on with this and watch the Evernote note over the next week for details. I'm going to aim for 10 o'clock next Sunday morning UK time, and we'll pick up with the line "Love and tolerance of others is our code." Is that all right with everyone? Good, I got some nodding there. So feel free to unmute yourselves, and we'll say the Serenity Prayer in a higgledy-piggledy fashion in whatever language you like. So English or Hebrew or Yiddish or anything else. So would you please join me in the Serenity Prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you for coming. And I'll see you all next week. Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for coming.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.